The coffee in my cup had long since cooled, but I continued to hold it as if it could warm my cold fingers. Outside the kitchen window, Fontana was greeting a new day. The sun cast slanting rays on my old wooden fence. 30 years ago, Olivia said she would paint it white, but the fence remained gray, faded by time, like all my hopes for family happiness. The phone had been silent for several days. Farley rarely called, only when necessary. Usually that meant she needed something. Money for new curtains, help buying a refrigerator, or another payment for the house. My electrician's hands, roughened from working with wires and tools, no longer bent as they used to, but my pocket was still open for my only daughter. When Olivia left, Farley was 15. Raging hormones and teenage maximalism turned her resentment into a wall of alienation. "It's your fault Mom left." These words became our greeting for many years. Even now, when she is 45, I see in her eyes the same 15-year-old teenager looking for someone to blame. Looking back, I understood my mistakes. Too much work, too little attention. Olivia said she was suffocating in this marriage, that she needed freedom and new horizons. She found them with an accountant from a neighboring town, tall, educated, and with prospects. Everything that a simple electrician from Fontana didn't have. I finished my cold coffee and glanced at the invitation lying on the table. The thick paper with gold embossing looked out of place among my modest belongings. Pre-wedding dinner in honor of Farley Baxter and Redding Hall. Tomorrow at 7 p.m. at the Laurel Wreath Restaurant. In small print at the bottom was a note, dress code, semi-formal. The suit, bought 15 years ago for the funeral of a distant relative, hung in my closet as a reminder of my loneliness. I had worn it only twice, both times to funerals. Now I was going to wear it to a pre-wedding celebration. The irony of life. I got up and groaned as I reached for the phone. The display showed a message from real estate agent Kira Abrams. "Mr. Baxter, there is a potential buyer for your daughter's house. We need to discuss the details. The house where Farley and Redding lived formerly belonged to me. I bought it for them 5 years ago, when Redding first came into Farley's life. He introduced himself as an ambitious accountant with big plans but little current income. I saw how my daughter's eyes lit up when she was with him, and I decided to help. I bought the house and registered it in my name, allowing them to live there and paying the mortgage from my savings. I'll call you back later," I replied to Kira and put the phone down. Selling the house was my backup plan. A backup plan in case of what? I didn't know myself. Maybe in case Redding turned out not to be who he claimed to be. Maybe in case my savings ran out before his career took off. Or maybe just in case I got tired of being an invisible benefactor. I took an old box of photographs out of the closet. Here's Farley on her 5th birthday. A smiling girl with freckles on her nose, looking so much like her mother. Here we are, the 3 of us, at the beach. The last summer before Olivia left. Here's Farley at her school graduation. I'm standing off to the side, and next to her is Olivia with her new husband. The photos became fewer and fewer over the years. The last one was taken 2 years ago. Farley and Redding in front of their house. My house, to be precise. They were smiling, and I was clicking the camera shutter, standing 5 steps away from them. Always 5 steps away. Redding Hall, tall with perfect posture and an eternally slightly haughty expression. He was 15 years younger than Farley, which caused whispers in Little Fontaine. But Farley seemed to blossom next to him, and I couldn't help but be happy for her. At first, he was polite to me. That kind of politeness that borders on contempt. "Thanks for your support, Thornton, but we can handle it ourselves," he would say as he accepted another check to pay the mortgage. Over time, even that formal politeness wore thin. 3 months ago, they announced their wedding. "Dad, Redding, and I have decided to get married," Farley said on the phone. Her voice was excited, but there was no question. It was a notification that did not require my approval. "Congratulations, dear," I replied, clutching the phone. "How can I help?" She paused, and I already knew what was coming next. "We found a place for the ceremony. It's very beautiful, but a little expensive." Thus began the preparations for the dream wedding, which emptied my bank account at the speed of a forest fire. The reception, restaurant, florists, photographers, designers, each of them cost a fortune. But I paid. I paid and kept quiet, hoping that it would at least slightly narrow the gap between me and my daughter. The clock showed almost 6. It was time to get ready for the pre-wedding dinner. I squeezed into my old suit, which was now a little tight in the shoulders and loose at the waist. I tied a dark blue tie, the only one I had, and looked at myself in the mirror. An old man with a wrinkled face and thinning gray hair stared back at me in bewilderment. "Where are you going, you old fool?" his gaze seemed to ask. The Laurel Wreath restaurant was located in the newest part of Fontana. The modern glass and concrete building looked out of place among the old houses and shops. I parked my beat-up pickup truck next to the shiny sedans and SUVs of the other guests and hesitantly entered. The maitre d' gave me a once-over. "Baxter Hall dinner?" he asked with a hint of contempt. I nodded, and he led me into a private room. About 20 people were already gathered there. Friends and colleagues of Farley and Redding, a few distant relatives. I recognized only a few of them. Farley and Redding stood in the center, accepting congratulations. She wore an elegant blue dress, he a perfectly tailored gray suit. They looked like a couple from the cover of a magazine, successful, stylish, happy. I stopped at the entrance, not daring to approach. Farley noticed me and her smile faltered for a moment. She said something to Redding, and he turned around. His face remained impassive, but there was a flash of irritation in his eyes. "Dad, you came." Farley approached and awkwardly hugged me. She smelled of expensive perfume that I could never afford. "I wouldn't miss a day like this," I replied, feeling my shirt stick to my back with nervous sweat. "Thornton, I'm glad you could join us." Redding extended his hand for a formal handshake. His palm was cool and dry, and his handshake was short and indifferent. "Congratulations to both of you," I said, taking an envelope from my inside pocket. "This is a small gift from me." Farley took the envelope with the check inside. "Thank you, Dad." "That's very sweet of you." "Yes, thank you," Redding echoed. "Please take a seat. We'll be starting soon." They returned to the other guests, and I remained standing, holding a glass of champagne that a passing waiter had handed me. I looked around for a free seat and found one only in the far corner of the room, next to the door to the kitchen. The dinner began with toasts and congratulations. The couple's friends talked about love, the future, and what a wonderful couple Farley and Redding were. I sat silently, poking at exquisite dishes with my fork, the names of which I couldn't even pronounce. "And now a word from the father of the bride," the master of ceremonies suddenly announced, and all eyes turned to me. I slowly stood up, feeling my knees tremble. What could I say? That I hardly knew the man my daughter was marrying? That I had paid for this whole celebration while remaining in the shadows? I want to congratulate Farley and Redding," I began, clearing my throat. "My daughter deserves the greatest happiness, and I hope you find it together." I raised my glass, met Farley's gaze, and saw something like regret in her eyes. Or maybe it was just my imagination. After dinner, the guests broke into groups, chatting animatedly. I stood by the window watching the city lights. An elderly woman approached me. "Redding's aunt," she introduced herself. "You must be very proud of your daughter," she said, smiling warmly. "Yes, very," I replied, grateful for the opportunity to talk to someone. "Redding is so talented. A wonderful career, his own house. They have a bright future ahead of them." I nodded, not correcting her mistake about his own house. "Have you been widowed for long?" she asked sympathetically. "I'm not a widower. My wife and I divorced 30 years ago." "Oh," her face changed. "I'm sorry. I didn't know." "It's okay," I tried to smile, but it came out more like a grimace. She soon found an excuse to leave, and I was alone again. Across the room, I could see Redding engage in a heated discussion with a group of friends. He was in his element, confident, charismatic, in control. Farley approached me as the evening was drawing to a close. She looked a little tired but happy. "Thanks for coming, Dad," she said, and I could hear the sincerity in her voice. "I wouldn't have missed it," I repeated. "You look happy." "I am happy," she smiled, looking toward Redding. "He's wonderful." I wanted to ask if he really was as wonderful as she thought. I wanted to remind her who was paying for their house and this wedding, but instead I just nodded. "Dad," she paused. "About tomorrow. I know it's traditional for the father to walk the bride down the aisle, but I felt something snap inside me. But you want someone else to do it." She lowered her eyes. "Jeffrey, Mom's husband. He's been there since I was 16. I thought, of course, I interrupted, not wanting to hear her explanation. I understand. You're not offended? No, dear. I want this day to be everything you've dreamed of. She smiled weakly and hugged me again. Thank you for understanding. Redding came over and put his hand on her shoulder. Farley, dear, the Morgans are about to leave. We need to say goodbye. She nodded and turned to me. See you tomorrow at the ceremony, Dad. They left and I stood there, feeling like a shadow among the bright, lively people. When most of the guests had left, I quietly left the restaurant and got into my old pickup truck. At home, I sat in the dark for a long time, staring at my phone. Late in the evening, a message came from Kira Abrams. The buyer is willing to pay full price and close the deal quickly. Let me know if you're interested. I put my phone away without replying. Tomorrow, my daughter is getting married. Tomorrow, I will sit in the back row and watch another man lead her down the aisle. And the day after tomorrow, I will decide what to do with the house and my life. As I fell asleep, I thought about how strange life is. I gave Farley everything I had: money, care, support. And in return, I received polite alienation and the status of an outsider at her wedding, a stranger among my own. That's what I've become. The morning after the pre-wedding dinner was cloudy. I sat at the kitchen table with my bank statements, receipts, and payment schedule spread out in front of me. The papers covered the entire surface, the history of my invisible support over the past 5 years. The monthly mortgage payment for Farley and Redding's house was $1,800, more precisely for my house, where they lived. 5 years ago, when Redding first came into Farley's life, he convinced her that they needed their own house. Start a new life in a new place, he said. Farley was thrilled with the idea, but they didn't have the money for the down payment. I remember the evening she called me. Her voice sounded unusually soft, almost like when she was a child asking for a new doll or bicycle. Dad, Redding and I have found the perfect house, but we're a little short on the down payment. I agreed to help without hesitation. It was my chance to get closer to my daughter, to show her that I still cared about her, despite the years of estrangement. But when I went to the bank, it turned out that Redding had credit history problems. They couldn't get a mortgage in his name, and Farley, with her teacher's salary, didn't meet the bank's requirements. There is an option to put the house in your name, Mr. Baxter, the bank manager suggested. With your credit history and retirement savings, it will even be more profitable. So the house at 23 Maple Street became mine, on paper. Farley and Redding moved in as owners, and I continued to live in my old house on the outskirts of Fountain. The original plan was for me to pay the down payment, and then they would make the monthly payments themselves. But 3 months later, Farley called me in tears. Dad, we're in trouble. Redding got laid off, and my salary isn't enough to cover the mortgage. And so I started paying. At first, it was temporary, until Redding found a new job. Then when he found one, it turned out that his starting salary was too low. Then there were other reasons. As a result, I had been paying for 5 years, sending money directly to the bank every month so that Farley and Redding wouldn't even know about my involvement. I sorted through the receipts, adding up the amounts. In addition to the mortgage, there were renovation costs. A new roof 2 years ago, $15,000, replacement of the water pipes, $7,000, kitchen renovation, $12,000. All of this went through my account, but for Farley, these were gifts for her birthday, Christmas, and Thanksgiving. The wedding expenses were in a separate pile. Farley had always dreamed of a lavish celebration, and I couldn't refuse her. The deposit for the restaurant was $5,000. Florists were $3,500. Photographer and videographer were $4,000. The list was long. The total amount was close to $30,000, and that didn't include the wedding dress Farley had picked out at a boutique in a neighboring town, another $6,000. I sighed and rubbed my temples. My retirement savings were melting away before my eyes. Working as an electrician in a small town isn't the most lucrative business, but I've always been frugal, and over the years, I've saved up a decent amount. Now only a small portion of it remained. The phone rang, interrupting my calculations. It was Kira Abrams, the real estate agent. Mr. Baxter, good morning. The buyer is very interested and ready to act quickly. He's offering the full price, $340,000. I was silent, not knowing what to say. Selling the house had always been just a theoretical possibility, a plan B that I never intended to put into action. Mr. Baxter, are you there? Yes, Kira. I I need to think about it. Of course, but don't take too long. Buyers like this rarely wait long. I hung up and went back to my papers. Among the receipts, I found a photo that I always carried with me. Farley as a child, with two pigtails and a crooked smile. Back then, she looked at me with adoration. When did everything change? Perhaps the most painful memories are from the period immediately after Olivia left. Farley blamed me for everything. You didn't love Mom enough. You worked too much. You were never romantic. At 15, she needed someone to blame, and I took on that role. I didn't try to justify myself or explain that Olivia didn't leave just because of me, that she was tired of living in a small town, that she had always been attracted to the lights of big cities, that the accountant from the neighboring town was just an excuse, not the reason. I let Farley hate me because it made it easier for her to cope with her mother's departure. And then it became a habit. She grew up, graduated from college, and started working as a teacher at a local school. Our relationship remained strained. Rare phone calls, formal meetings on holidays. I was just glad she hadn't cut off contact completely. Redding's arrival 5 years ago changed a lot. Farley seemed to blossom around him. She was 40, he was 25. The age difference caused gossip in town, but I was happy to see my daughter happy. If this young man could give her what I couldn't, so be it. I remembered our first meeting. Farley brought him to a barbecue on Independence Day. He was tall, fit, with neatly styled dark hair and attentive eyes. He shook my hand firmly but quickly, as if performing a necessary formality. Nice to meet you, sir. Farley has told me a lot about you. His smile didn't reach his eyes. At the time, I thought he was just nervous about meeting his girlfriend's father. But over time, I realized that Redding Hall was simply playing the role of a caring partner masterfully, hiding his true nature. When they announced their plans to live together and buy a house, I saw it as a chance to mend my relationship with my daughter. I offered to help with the down payment and took out a mortgage in my name. Farley was grateful but reserved. Redding took my help for granted. It's the least you can do, considering what Farley went through because of you, he said to me once when we were alone. I didn't respond. What could I say? He was right. I was guilty towards my daughter. And if my money could atone for that guilt even a little, I was willing to pay. Gradually, Redding began to take up more and more space in Farley's life. She was changing. She changed her hairstyle, her style of dress, even her manner of speaking. Now her speech was filled with words she had never used before. Investments, career growth, social status. She also started calling me less often. Our rare conversations increasingly revolved around money. She needed repairs, her car broke down, she wanted new furniture. I never refused. It was my way of staying in her life, even if only on the periphery. I gathered the papers and put them in a folder. It was time to prepare for the wedding. I took out a pressed white shirt and an old suit. There was a small hole in the inside pocket of the jacket, a cigarette burn left by a careless neighbor at a funeral. I carefully mended it, even though I knew no one would notice anyway. The phone rang again. This time it was Farley. Dad, could you come by today? We need to discuss something about tomorrow's ceremony. Of course, dear. What time? Around 5. Redding will be home, I agreed and hung up. It was strange that she wanted to meet the day before the wedding. Usually all the details are discussed in advance. Maybe there were some problems with the organization, or with the payment. I mentally counted my remaining savings. If necessary, I could borrow from my neighbor Walter or sell my old motorcycle, which was sitting in the garage. Before leaving, I stopped by the bank to withdraw some cash. My account balance looked sad. $15,700. A year ago, it had been 3 times that amount. I withdrew $1,000 just in case I needed to pay for something urgently for the wedding. The Farley and Redding house, my house on paper, was one of the most beautiful in the new Fontana neighborhood. It was 2 stories high, with large windows and a well-kept garden. I parked next to Redding's brand new BMW, another purchase that I had partially financed, although Farley didn't know about it. Farley herself opened the door. She looked a little tense, but smiled when she saw me. Dad, come in. Reading is in the living room. I entered the spacious hall. The interior of the house was as impressive as the exterior. Designer furniture, paintings on the walls, a crystal chandelier. Everything screamed money and taste, which neither Farley nor I had. It was Redding's style, expensive and ostentatious. Redding was sitting on the sofa with a tablet in his hands. He looked up when I entered, but did not get up. "Thornton, good evening," he said without much enthusiasm. "Hello, Redding. Farley said you wanted to discuss something about tomorrow?" Farley sat down next to Redding, as if seeking his support. "Yes, Dad. We thought, we decided to change some details of the ceremony." I waited for her to continue, feeling the tension mounting. "The thing is," Redding interjected, "there will be important guests tomorrow. My colleagues, potential clients, people I want to impress." I looked at him blankly. What did that have to do with me? "We want everything to be perfect," Farley continued, avoiding my gaze. "And we thought, maybe it would be better if you didn't participate in the main ceremony." I blinked, unsure if I had heard correctly. "Not participate? What do you mean?" "What do? We decided it would be better if you just came as a guest," Redding said bluntly. "No speeches, no special role. Just sit and watch." I felt the blood drain from my face. "But I thought I would at least give a toast." "You see, Dad?" Farley nervously fiddled with the edge of her blouse. "Reading thinks, and I agree with him, that your old-fashioned views and way of speaking might not go down well with the guests' old-fashioned views." I still couldn't believe what was happening. "Let's be honest, Thornton." Redding put down his tablet. "You're a simple electrician from a small town. You don't know how to behave in society. You don't know etiquette. Your suit looks like you bought it at a thrift store 20 years ago." I was silent, stunned by his bluntness. "This isn't rudeness, it's facts," he continued. "There will be people at our wedding who can help me in my career. I can't risk Father Farley not fitting into the image of a successful family that I'm creating." "Redding," Farley gave him a warning look. "We agreed to be more tactful. Why beat around the bush? Your father is a grown man. He'll understand." I looked at my daughter, expecting her to defend me, but she just sighed. "Dad, please understand. This is an important day for us. We want everything to be perfect. You said yourself that you want me to be happy." I nodded slowly, feeling a void growing inside me. "I understand. I'll just sit and watch." "Thanks for understanding." Farley looked relieved. "And one more thing. We thought it would be better if you didn't sit in the front row." "Not in the front?" "Maybe somewhere in the middle or even closer to the back," said Redding. "The front rows are reserved for close friends and important guests." I felt something break inside me. My own daughter was telling me that I wasn't one of the people closest to her at her wedding, a wedding that I was paying for. "Okay," I stood up, not wanting to show how much they had hurt me. "Is that all you wanted to discuss?" Farley and Redding exchanged glances. "Actually," Farley began, "we don't think you should come to the rehearsal dinner tonight," Redding finished for her. "It's only for the ceremony participants. And since you're not—" "I understand," I interrupted, not wanting to hear any more. "I won't be coming." I headed for the exit, but stopped at the door and turned around. "Farley, can I talk to you alone for a minute?" She looked uncertainly at Redding, who nodded slightly as if giving permission. We went out onto the porch. The evening sun gilded the treetops, and the air was filled with the scent of jasmine, which I had planted myself at the entrance 3 years ago. "Honey, are you sure this is what you want?" I asked quietly. "I mean, not the ceremony, but all of this. Redding, this marriage." Farley sighed. "Dad, don't start. We've already discussed this." "No, we haven't. You just said you were marrying him." And I agreed. "Because it's my life and my decision." Her voice hardened. "Redding cares about me. He gives me what you could never give me." I recoiled as if from a blow. "What do you mean?" "Stability. Confidence in tomorrow. He won't abandon me like you abandoned Mom." "I didn't abandon your mother. She left because you gave her no reason to stay." Farley raised her voice. "You were always busy with your work, your wires and switches. You never had any ambitions, any aspirations. You were content with your mediocre life in this mediocre town." Her words cut like knives. "I worked to provide for you, to make sure you had everything you needed. Everything I needed, yes, but not what I dreamed of, not what makes life worth living. And Redding gives you that?" Yes, she crossed her arms over her chest. He's ambitious. He has a plan. In 5 years, he'll be a partner in his firm. In 10, he'll open his own. We'll have a house not in Fontana, but in San Diego or Los Angeles. We'll travel, meet interesting people. I listened to her and saw before me not my daughter, but Olivia 30 years ago, with the same dreams and disappointments. I understand, I said quietly. I hope he makes you happy. Farley softened a little. He already does, Dad. Really, just try to understand and don't make it complicated. I nodded and walked to the car. She didn't stop me or call out to me. She just stood on the porch watching me drive away. At home, I sat down at the table and spread out my bank statements and receipts again. All the evidence of my invisible support. Support that Farley didn't see or didn't want to see, believing that it was all Redding's doing. My phone vibrated. A message from Kira Abrams. The buyer is waiting for your decision by tomorrow. Otherwise, they will look for other options. I stared at the screen, feeling a determination growing inside me. Maybe it was time to stop being invisible. Maybe it was time to show my support, or lack thereof, in all its glory. The morning before the wedding was unusually quiet. I woke up at dawn, an old habit I hadn't been able to shake, even in retirement. The house was cold. Autumn in Fontaine always came unexpectedly, as if summer had surrendered without a fight overnight. I threw on my old plaid robe and put the kettle on. Yesterday's conversation with Farley and Redding still hurt. It's better if you don't participate in the main ceremony. Sit somewhere in the middle or even closer to the end. Don't come to the rehearsal dinner. Each phrase pierced my heart like a sharp needle. My own daughter was pushing me to the sidelines of her life, as if I were an old, useless thing. The kettle whistled, pulling me out of my bitter thoughts. I brewed strong black tea, the only luxury I allowed myself every morning. Sitting by the window, I watched the city wake up. Mrs. Parker walked by with her 3 pugs. The Jenkins boys, always late for school, sped by on their bikes. Fountain went about its usual business, unaware of the storm raging in my soul. On the table lay a wedding invitation, thick paper with gold embossing. Farley Baxter and Redding Hall invite you to share their joy. I smiled. I was invited to share the joy of a wedding that I was paying for, but at which I was an unwelcome guest. Next to the invitation lay a box, my wedding gift to Farley. It was a small mahogany box that I had ordered from a carpenter in a neighboring town. Inside was a silver brooch that had belonged to my mother. It was the only family heirloom I wanted to pass on to my daughter. I remembered how Farley loved to play with this brooch as a child. When I grow up, will it be mine? She would ask, and I promised to give it to her as a wedding gift. Back then, we were still a family, and the future seemed bright. My phone vibrated, a message from Kira Abrams. Mr. Baxter, the buyer insists on an answer by the end of the day. It's a very lucrative offer. I put the phone down without answering. Sell the house where Farley and Redding live? The thought still seemed sacrilegious. Despite yesterday's conversation, despite their attitude, it was my gift to my daughter. I couldn't just take it away, or could I? I remembered Redding's words about my old-fashioned suit, about how I didn't know how to behave properly in society, about how I was just an old electrician who didn't fit into their new, shiny life. Maybe he was right. Maybe I really should leave the stage and let them live the way they wanted. But first, I had to give her the gift. I had promised myself that I would give Farley the brooch before the wedding, and I intended to keep that promise. Whatever our relationship was, she was still my daughter. I took a shower, shaved, and put on a fresh shirt and jeans. I combed my thinning gray hair and looked at my reflection in the mirror. An old man with tired eyes looked back at me. When had I grown so old? It seemed like only yesterday that I was a young father rocking Farley on my knees. I took the box with the brooch and left the house. The day was clear but cool. Perfect weather for an autumn wedding, I thought. Farley was lucky. Tomorrow should be just as sunny. On the way to my daughter's house, I stopped at a flower shop and bought a small bouquet of white lilies, Farley's favorite flowers. The saleswoman, knowing about the upcoming wedding, smiled at me. "For your daughter, Mr. Baxter." What a wonderful day for her. I nodded, unable to share her enthusiasm. Yes, a wonderful day. Farley and Redding's house was in turmoil when I pulled up. There were several cars in the driveway, and voices and laughter could be heard through the open windows. Apparently, Farley's friends were helping with the final preparations. I hesitated before ringing the doorbell. The door was opened not by Farley, but by a young woman with a clipboard in her hands, obviously the wedding coordinator. "Are you here to see the bride?" she asked, looking me up and down. "I'm her father," I replied, feeling a strange need to explain myself. "Oh, come in, Mr. Baxter. Farley is upstairs with her bridesmaids. They're finishing the dress fitting." I entered the house, immediately feeling like a stranger amid the pre-wedding bustle. In the living room, several women were arranging small items in baskets, apparently gifts for the guests. They glanced at me briefly and returned to their task. "Is Redding home?" I asked the coordinator. "Yes, he's in his office. He's even working on a day like this." She laughed as if it were something delightful. I headed for the office at the back of the house. The door was ajar and I saw Redding at his computer. He was talking on the phone, not noticing me. "Yes, everything is going according to plan." "No, the old man isn't causing any trouble. After the wedding, we'll get rid of him quickly." I froze, hesitating to enter. What old man was he talking about? Me. Redding laughed in response to something his interlocutor said. "You know, he practically paid for the whole wedding. It would be stupid to turn down that kind of money." "Yes, the house is also registered in his name, but that's temporary." My heart pounded. I had to leave. I had to stop listening to this conversation, but my feet seemed to be glued to the floor. "Farley? She's too sentimental, but she listens to me." "No, I convinced her that he shouldn't perform at the wedding and sit in the front row." "Can you believe it? The old man didn't even argue." Redding laughed again. "After the wedding, I plan to transfer the house to us and keep contact to a minimum. Maybe a couple of phone calls a year so he doesn't feel completely abandoned." I felt nauseous. At that moment, Redding turned and saw me in the doorway. For a second, his face showed a flicker of alarm, but he quickly regained his composure. "Jason, I'll call you back," he said into the phone and hung up. "Thornton, I didn't expect to see you today." I stood silently, not knowing what to say. Part of me wanted to rush at him with my fists. The other part wanted to turn around and walk away. "I brought a gift for Farley," I finally managed to say, holding up the box and the bouquet. "How nice," Redding said, rising from the table. There was no hint of embarrassment in his voice. "Farley is busy with her friends right now. You know, women's stuff before the wedding. I can give her your gift. I'd prefer to give it to her myself." "I'm afraid that's not possible. She's very busy and stressed before the big day. Any emotional impact is undesirable right now." Emotional impact. As if I were some kind of toxic substance capable of poisoning his daughter's happiness. "I'm not going to upset her," I said, trying to remain calm. "I just want to give her the gift and congratulate her." Redding sighed with feigned regret. "Listen, Thornton, let's be honest. Your presence here is unwelcome. You've already done enough for this wedding, and we're grateful for your financial support. But now it's better if you just leave and show up at the ceremony tomorrow. You'll sit in the back rows as we agreed and watch quietly." I felt a wave of anger rising inside me. I didn't agree to sit in the back rows. "You and Farley decided that without me, details." Redding waved his hand. "The point is that your role in this wedding is that of an outside observer. Nothing more. I'm the bride's father." "Technically, yes. But let's be honest. You were never a real father to Farley. You let her mother walk away, leaving her child heartbroken. You were too busy with your work to notice her needs. And only when she grew up and met me did you suddenly decide to play the role of the caring daddy." Every word hit home. I clenched the box with the brooch so tightly that my knuckles turned white. "That's not true," I said hoarsely. "I always cared for Farley. I always tried to give her everything I could, maybe. But it wasn't enough, was it? Otherwise, she wouldn't have kept her distance from you all these years." I didn't know how to respond. Redding saw my confusion and continued his attack. "Do you know what the best wedding gift for us would be, Thornton?" He moved closer, lowering his voice almost intimately. "If you disappeared from our family. Completely. No phone calls, no visits, no awkward holiday gatherings where no one knows what to talk to you about." The air seemed to be sucked out of the room. I stood there looking at this man, young, handsome, confident in his superiority, and couldn't believe what I was hearing. Does Farley know you feel this way? I asked, barely recognizing my own voice. Redding shrugged. She understands that you are part of her past, not her future. She is willing to maintain a formal relationship out of a sense of duty, but nothing more. And yes, she agrees that after the wedding, we need to move forward, leaving behind certain aspects of her life. I looked at the bouquet in my hands. The lilies had already begun to wilt, their white petals slightly curled at the edges. Tell Farley I stopped by, I said, placing the box and flowers on the nearest table, and that I wish her happiness. I will. Redding smiled with relief, seeing that I had given in. See you tomorrow, Thornton. And don't forget, the back rows. I left the house without saying goodbye to the coordinator and the bride's friends. I got in the car and sat there for a long time, looking at the house, the beautiful, spacious house I had bought for my daughter. The house where there was no place for me. My phone vibrated again. Kira Abrams. Mr. Baxter, the buyer is waiting. Have you made a decision? I started the engine and drove onto the road. On the way home, I stopped at the bank and sat in the parking lot for a long time, gathering my thoughts. Then I went inside and asked for a printout of all the transactions on my account for the last 5 years. The complete history of my financial support for Farley and Redding. At home, I sat down at my computer, an old laptop that I rarely used. I checked my email and found a message from the wedding planner, sent to me in copy a few months ago. It contained the password to the online gallery where all the details of the wedding preparations were stored. I entered the password and gained access to all the information: guest lists, menus, seating plans, and contact details for all the contractors. I didn't even have to hack into the account. Redding was so sure of my innocence that he didn't even remove me from the copy of the email. In the seating plan section, I found my name. It was at the very end of the list in the last row, next to some cousin of Redding's whom he admitted he barely knew. I closed my laptop and walked over to the window. The sun was already setting, painting the sky above the fountain in shades of orange and pink. A beautiful evening before an important day. The phone rang. This time it wasn't Kira, but Farley. Dad, her voice sounded tense. Redding said you stopped by. Yes, I wanted to give you a gift before the wedding. Thank you. It's very beautiful. Her tone made it clear that she hadn't even opened the box. There was an awkward pause. Anything else? I asked, unable to continue this fake conversation. Yes, about tomorrow. I know. Back rows, no speeches. Just sit and watch Dad. Don't say that. This is an important day for me, and I want you to be there. Just not in a prominent place. I understand, Farley. Another pause. You're offended. No, I lied. I understand. It's your day, and you want everything to be perfect. Exactly. Thank you for understanding. She sounded relieved. See you tomorrow then? Of course. Tomorrow I hung up and stared at the phone for a long time. Then I dialed Kira Abrams' number. Mr. Baxter. I was just about to call you. The buyer is very insistent. I agree, I interrupted her. Sell the house. Great. Kira didn't hide her joy. I'll prepare all the documents, but we'll need to notify the tenants. I'll take care of that myself, I said. How quickly can we close the deal? With the buyer so interested and provided that all the documents are in order. I think in a day or two. Excellent. Get started right away. I hung up and took a large folder of documents out of the closet. The title deed to the house, the mortgage agreement, all the payment receipts. I bought this house for Farley, hoping it would bring us closer together. Now I was selling it, realizing that there was an unbridgeable gap between us. Then I sat down at the computer and started writing emails. The first was to the wedding planner, informing them that payment for their services was canceled. The second was to the restaurant where the reception was to be held, with a similar notification. The third was to the florists, photographers, musicians. The list was long. By midnight, everything was done. I leaned back in my chair, feeling a strange emptiness. Farley was supposed to get married tomorrow, but there would be no wedding, at least not the lavish ceremony she had dreamed of. And there would be no home for them to return to after their honeymoon either. The best gift would be if you disappeared from our family. Well, Redding would get his best gift, but not quite as he had expected. I took an old notebook and a pen out of the dresser. I sat down at the table and began to write a letter to Farley, which I would leave in the empty house along with all the documents and statements. She had to know the truth. She must understand what she has lost because of Redding and his ambitions. "Dear Farley," I began, and my hand trembled. For so many years I tried to reach her, to show her my love. For so many years I remained in the shadows, hoping that one day she would see how much I did for her. But that never happened. And now it was time for the final lesson. I wrote until dawn, pouring all my pain, all my hopes, all my disappointment into the words. When I finished, the sky was already lightening. A new day was beginning, a day that was supposed to be my daughter's wedding day, but would become the day of truth. I gathered all the documents, the letter and the house keys into one large folder. I opened my phone and wrote a short message to Kira Abrams. "The house will be completely vacant today. The new owners can move in tomorrow." Then I called the train station and booked a ticket for the train leaving at 3 in the afternoon. A small town on the coast where I had an old friend who agreed to take me in for the time being. Far away from Fontana, from memories, from pain. The sun rose over Fontana, promising a perfect day for a wedding. I was already far away, sitting on a train that was taking me away from my past life. But I found out later what happened that day in the city. From the stories of neighbors, random witnesses, and even the local newspaper, which couldn't pass up such a scandal. The day began like a fairy tale for Farley. Her friends arrived early in the morning, bringing champagne and breakfast. The wedding dress hung on the closet door, cream-colored, with lace trim and a long train, for which I had paid $6,000. The photographer clicked away, capturing the bride's happy morning. Redding woke up at his friend's house. It's a tradition not to see the bride before the ceremony. He put on a new suit he had ordered from Milan, combed his dark hair, and drank whiskey with his friends to celebrate the big day. A perfect wedding awaited him, and most importantly, a financially secure future. The first call with bad news came around 9 in the morning. Wedding planner Melanie Porter called Farley in a state close to hysteria. "What do you mean the payment was canceled?" Farley couldn't believe her ears. "What deposit?" "No, you must be confused. Everything has been paid for a long time." But Melanie wasn't confused. Last night, she received a letter on my behalf demanding that all services be canceled and the deposit refunded. The bank had already withdrawn the payment, and now she couldn't continue working. "But the wedding is in 3 hours," Farley shouted. "You can't just cancel everything." "I'm very sorry, Miss Baxter, but without payment, I can't." Farley hung up and immediately dialed Redding's number. He didn't answer. He was in the shower. Then she called me. His phone was turned off. The next call came from the maitre d' of the restaurant where the reception was to be held. Same story. Payment withdrawn, event canceled. Then the florist called, then the photographer. One by one, all the contractors reported that there would be no wedding. Farley rushed around the house trying to figure out what was going on. Her friends looked at each other in confusion, not knowing how to help. The makeup artist and hairdresser, who had come to do the bride's hair and makeup, stood awkwardly in the hallway, not daring to start work in such an atmosphere. Finally, Redding called back. Upon hearing the news, he rushed to the house in a record 15 minutes. "What the hell is going on?" He burst into the bedroom, where Farley was sitting on the bed with her head in her hands. "Who canceled the payment?" "My father," she replied quietly. "It must be him. But why? What for?" Redding cursed and started calling the bank to try to figure it out, but they only confirmed the information. All payments had indeed been revoked by the account holder. "I'll pay with my card," Redding decided. "I'll transfer the money to the organizer right now and everything will be—" He didn't finish, staring at his phone screen. His credit card had been declined. The limit had been reached. "Don't worry," he tried to reassure Farley. "I have another card. And we can borrow from friends. The wedding will happen, I promise." But when he started calling his friends, it turned out that no one was willing to lend such a large amount at the last minute. And the second card didn't work either. Redding remembered that he had used it to pay for the suit and restaurant for the bachelor party. At 10 o'clock in the morning, when the panic was at its peak, the doorbell rang. An unfamiliar woman in a strict suit was standing on the doorstep. "Miss Baxter? Mr. Hall?" She looked at the disheveled Farley and the alarmed Redding. "My name is Kira Abrams. I'm a real estate agent. I'm here to tell you that this house has been sold." The silence that followed was deafening. Farley stared at the woman as if she were speaking a foreign language. "What do you mean, sold?" Redding finally managed to say. This is our house. Kira Abrams shook her head. According to the documents, the house belongs to Thornton Baxter. He signed the sales contract yesterday. The new owners are moving in tomorrow. This must be some kind of mistake, Farley paled. My father couldn't. I'm afraid he could and did, Kira said, handing them a copy of the sales contract with my signature on it. You need to vacate the premises by 6 p.m. today. Redding snatched the document from the realtor's hands and began studying it, as if hoping to find a loophole. But everything was in order. The house no longer belonged to them. Where's Thornton? Redding demanded. I need to talk to him. Mr. Baxter didn't tell me about his plans, Kira replied. He just said he left some documents for you inside the house. She left, leaving chaos behind her. Redding rushed around the house, checking every room for the promised documents. Farley sat on the sofa, still unable to believe what was happening. Her friends quietly gathered their things, realizing that there would be no wedding. Finally, Redding found a large folder on the kitchen table labeled for Farley and Redding. Inside were dozens of papers, bank statements, receipts, contracts, photographs, and a letter sealed in an envelope. What's this? Farley came over and took the envelope. Her hands were shaking as she opened it. Dear Farley, she began to read aloud. By the time you receive this letter, I will be far away. As Redding requested, I will disappear from your life. But before I do, I want you to know the truth. Redding tensed, but did not interrupt. 5 years ago, when you and Redding decided to buy a house, I agreed to help with the down payment. But it turned out that Redding had credit history issues, and the bank would not approve a mortgage in his name. So the house was registered in my name. I only had to make the down payment, and then you planned to pay the rest yourselves. Farley glanced quickly at Redding, who avoided meeting her gaze. But 3 months later, you called me in tears, saying that Redding had been laid off and you couldn't afford the mortgage. I started making the monthly payments, thinking it was temporary, but temporary became permanent. Over 5 years, I paid over $100,000 on the mortgage, as well as paying for roof repairs, plumbing replacements, and kitchen renovations. Farley paused, her voice trembling. Is that true? She asked, looking at Redding. Read on, he hissed through clenched teeth. All these years, I hoped that my help would bring us closer together, that you would see how much I do for you and forgive old grievances. But instead, a wall grew between us. Redding convinced you that I was to blame for all our family's troubles, that I didn't deserve a place in your life. Farley took a breath and continued. Yesterday, Redding told me that the best gift for your wedding would be for me to disappear from your family. I overheard him talking to a friend, bragging about how he was using me to pay for the wedding and then getting rid of the old man. Redding's face contorted with rage. He's lying. He made it all up. In this folder, you'll find proof of everything I've written, Farley read, ignoring Redding's exclamations. Bank statements showing all payments, receipts for repairs and upgrades, the mortgage agreement in my name, and printouts of Redding's messages to his friends, where he discusses his plans. Farley looked up from the letter. Printouts of messages? What messages? Redding turned pale. He's bluffing. He couldn't have accessed my messages. Farley put down the letter and began sorting through the documents. Among the bank statements and receipts were printouts of Redding's correspondence with his friend Jason, the same person he was talking to on the phone when I overheard him. The old man put almost all his savings into this house and the wedding, Redding wrote. After the ceremony, we'll get rid of him quickly. Maybe we'll move to another city under the pretext of my new job. He won't even realize he's been used. What about the house? Jason asked. It's in his name. I'll take care of that. Farley is his only daughter. When the old man kicks the bucket, she'll get everything. Which means I'll get it. Farley read these messages, tears streaming down her face. She turned to Redding, who now looked cornered. Is it true? Did you use me to get to my father's money? Farley, listen. Redding tried to take her hand, but she pulled away. Answer me, is it true or not? Redding changed tactics. What if I did? Your father owes you. He destroyed your family and made your mother suffer. Doesn't he owe you compensation? Compensation? Farley couldn't believe her ears. You're talking about my father like he's an ATM. An ATM that will soon run dry. Redding didn't hold back. Face the truth, Farley. He's over 70. In a few years, he'll die, and all his property will go to you. I just sped up the process. Farley recoiled as if from a blow. She continued sorting through the documents and found bank statements. Thousands of dollars transferred to pay the mortgage every month. Checks for roof repairs, plumbing, kitchen renovations, wedding service bills, all paid from my account. He paid for everything, she whispered. All this time I thought we were managing on our own. And he, what difference does it make who paid? Redding dismissed. The main thing is that we had everything we needed. You lied to me, Farley looked at him in horror. All these years you said we were paying for the house ourselves, that your career was taking off. I didn't lie, I just simplified reality. My career is really taking off. In a couple of years, I'll be a partner in the firm. A partner? Farley laughed through her tears. Reading, you're a simple accountant in a small company. You haven't even been promoted in all these years. Because I'm waiting for the right moment, he shouted. I need connections, a reputation. That's why this wedding was so important. It had to be attended by people who could help me move forward. Farley shook her head and returned to the letter. And one more thing, dear, she continued reading. I sold the house because it's mine. I bought it for you, hoping it would make you happy. But it became a symbol of lies and manipulation. I couldn't let that continue. She looked up from her reading and surveyed the living room. Spacious, bright, with expensive furniture and paintings. None of it belonged to them anymore. What now? She asked quietly. Where will we live? How will we pay our debts? Redding chuckled. We have my apartment. It's small, but it'll do for now. And then what? Farley looked at him as if she were seeing him for the first time. Find another sponsor? Or will you finally start earning enough? Don't be silly, Redding grabbed her by the shoulders. We'll manage. We always have. No, Farley pulled away. We didn't manage. My father managed for us, and we just lived off his money letting you build a successful man. The doorbell rang. Standing on the threshold were the guests, the first ones invited to the wedding who hadn't received the cancellation notice. They looked puzzled at the tearful Farley in her home clothes instead of a wedding dress. There won't be a wedding, she said quietly. I'm sorry we didn't warn you. The guests looked at each other, not knowing what to say. What happened, Farley? One of the women asked. Can we help with anything? No, she replied, looking at Redding. No one can help. Just go home. All day long, cars pulled up to the house with guests, and everyone had to be told that the ceremony was canceled. Some left in confusion, others tried to comfort Farley, and still others were angry about the time and effort they had wasted. By evening, the house was empty. Only Farley and Redding remained, sitting in different corners of the living room, not looking at each other. I can't believe he did this to us, Redding finally said. Ruining our wedding, selling the house. How cruel. Farley looked up from the documents she was still sorting through. Cruel? What about what you did? You used me to get your father's money. You lied to me for years. You planned to get rid of him as soon as you got what you wanted. I loved you. Redding tried to make his voice sound sincere. Yes, I took advantage of the situation, but weren't you happy all these years? Weren't we happy together? I don't know. Farley closed the folder with the documents. I thought I was happy, but now I realize that I was living in a world of illusions. The house that I considered our achievement was a gift from my father. The successful career you boasted about was a fabrication. Even the dream wedding we supposedly saved up for was paid for out of his retirement savings. So what now? Redding stood up and walked over to her. Are you going to leave me? Are you going to run off to find your father and ask for forgiveness? Farley didn't answer. She took out her phone and tried to call me again. As before, the phone was turned off. He's no longer in our lives, Redding said. He got what he wanted. He disappeared, just as I asked. Only he did it his way, taking revenge on us in the end. He didn't take revenge, Farley shook her head. He just showed the truth. About you, about me, about how we treated him all these years. She got up and headed for the stairs. Where are you going? Redding called after her. To pack my things. We have to vacate the house by 6 o'clock. And where will you go? Farley stopped halfway down the stairs. I don't know, but definitely not with you. Reading lunged toward her. You can't just walk out like this. We had plans, a future. Plans based on lies, Farley pushed him away. a future built on my father's money. None of that exists anymore. She went upstairs, leaving Redding standing at the foot of the stairs. An hour later, she came down with 2 suitcases. Are you serious? Redding couldn't believe his eyes. 5 years together, and you're just walking away. 5 years of lies, Farley corrected him. And yes, I'm leaving. Where? To your father, Redding laughed. He abandoned you. He ran away without even saying goodbye. I don't know where he went. Farley took the folder with the documents. But I'll find him, and I'll try to fix everything, if it's not too late. She headed for the door. Redding grabbed her arm. Don't do this, Farley. We can start over. I'll find a better job. We'll rent an apartment. Without my father's money? She pulled her hand away. I doubt you're capable of that. Redding's face changed. You'll regret this. When you find yourself alone, without money, without a home. Maybe, Farley opened the door, but not as much as I regret the last 5 years. She left, leaving Redding alone in the empty house that would soon be transferred to new owners. The house I bought for her, hoping for happiness, but receiving only pain and disappointment. In the evening, as the last rays of the sun painted the sky above Fontana in crimson tones, Farley sat in a small motel on the outskirts of town. In front of her on the bed were documents from a folder. The whole story of my invisible support and Redding's lies. She tried to call me again and again, but the phone remained off. I was already far away, starting a new life without toxic relationships, without ingratitude, without pain. And in the empty house on Maple Street, Redding sat alone, surrounded by scattered wedding decorations and half-empty bottles of champagne. His plans had collapsed. His source of funding had dried up. His reputation as a successful man was in jeopardy. Everything he had built over 5 years had fallen apart in a single day. The empty house became a symbol of the collapse of their illusions. The house I bought with love and sold with pain. The house where only the truth remained, the bitter, naked truth about greed, manipulation, and broken relationships.